Guys, this is Nick Christopher from Mob Tales. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for you guys' support. Please like, share, and subscribe. Definitely appreciate it. Today we have our story today would be, what I would term it as blood ties to the mob, pretty much. We have a special guest from who's overseas actually, in Costa Rica, which is pretty cool. His name is Joseph Pastore. And his background is very interesting, where he hung out, his family's got some ties. His family had some ties to guys like Joe Messino and Sal Vitale and so forth that we're going to be talking about today. So, Joe, thanks a lot for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Sure, awesome. Well, for the audience anyway, the story, the question I would pretty much ask from the beginning is when did you realize that some people in your family, not everybody, some people, your uncles anyway, Leo and Joe, were at all connected at all in any way? When did you begin to realize this?
Well, Nick, it started when I was probably, I guess, 13, 14. My father had come from a big family. Actually, my mother and father came from a big family. And my father had a brother named Leo, and he had a nephew named Joseph, which we'll discuss. I am Joseph Pastore. There were 7 Joseph Pastores, including my grandfather, my father, 2 cousins, myself, and a second cousin and his son. I first realized with my uncle Leo, he was very close to the family. He was one of my closest uncles on my father's side, and very, very, how do you say it, business type man, always in a suit, but he obviously was involved in the life. His level of activity really was not part of the violent part of the life, but more of the business part. He was at the time had one of the largest policy syndicates, which was the numbers at that time, and he the most violent part of his career probably was his murder. But I was first introduced to that life through my uncle Leo. And you said I had uncles. The other 2 that were involved in the life was 2 cousins. Like I said, Leo had the largest numbers syndicate in the borough of Brooklyn at that time. And that is when I first learned of my family's involvement.
So that's around what, the late 70s, roughly?
That would be the late 70s. He was killed in 72, so late 60s, early 70s, right? And that's when I was introduced to it.
Okay. Well, so prior to that, to make it a little more clearer, so people understand, guys like your Uncle Leo, your cousin Joe, these individuals, they were connected to Joe Messino, if I'm correct.
Well, Joseph Dudu Pastore had the more direct connection to Messino. My Uncle Leo, I believe, when I first started trying to research, I wasn't aware of which family he was associated. Recently, I found it to be the Genovese family that Leo was associated, and Joseph Dudu Pastore was associated with the Colombo family, which also was involved with the Bonanno family. Actually, he was the associate of Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and also Bonanno. So his
Oh,
direct ties with Messina would have been through the Bonanno family.
well, he worked for everybody, basically. Um,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
he did.
But he was, if I remember correctly, as we discussed, he was involved with some cigarette smuggling.
That is correct. His main business in the life was smuggling and loan sharking. He was a Shylock. Um, his involvement with Messino became part of the cigarette smuggling. And there's reports that Dudu was one of Messino's smugglers, but in fact, my cousin was his own boss. And that's pretty much why he was affiliated with more than one family.
Right. Okay. He was a freelancer, basically. Um,
Yes, and which could have been the demise of him.
right. Okay. Well, I remember you mentioned this interesting story that when you really got the first-hand taste of the life was, I think it was Leo. I wasn't sure if it was Leo or Joe. I think it was Joe, I think, uh, that came to your house with some of the guys. I think with maybe it was Denona. I wasn't sure if it was Denona or DeLeo.
Okay,
One of
okay.
the,
It was actually both.
it was actually both.
My right. I would say myself, excuse me, and my father had no affiliation with no families. But in this one instance, I would have to say I was involved because of this time that you're discussing. Um, me and my sister were getting ready to go to school one day, and our mom said, "You guys aren't going to school today." And we were a little confused, but no school, great. So a little while later, she did say that cousin Dudu, we did refer to him as Dudu. Cousin Dudu is coming by, and I want you guys to be home. So we stayed home, and what happened was my cousin Joseph Dudu came to the house. He he was to us he was like family, so we didn't think anything of it. What happened was he said to me, Joe, when I tell you, please open the garage door. And I said, okay. So what happened was he told me, go open the garage door. I went out, I opened the garage door, and what I saw was a one of those big box U-Haul trucks, about 24 foot, backed up to the garage. Three guys got out of the truck, came in. Well, actually, two of them came in. The driver stayed out. They unloaded the truck of boxes, which in the garage probably filled it from the back wall more than halfway in the garage. So they close the garage door, the truck takes off. Now, what they're doing is they're taking these cartons of cigarettes out of these boxes, putting them in our kitchen, which was downstairs. We had an upstairs kitchen and a downstairs kitchen, Italian family, summer kitchen, winter kitchen. And the kitchen downstairs was so big that we actually had one of those redwood picnic tables with the wood benches in the kitchen. So what happened was they on the counter they stacked the cigarettes, cartons of cigarettes. The empty boxes they put on the table, and they would call out. My cousin was calling out 10 Marlboro, 10 Parliament, 6 Salem. And me, my sister, and my mother are taking cartons of cigarettes and throwing them on the table. They're packing them in the box and filling orders, is what it ended up being. Exactly. So this went on all day. And what happened was we broke for lunch, and then we were talking, and my cousin said, "You want a carton of cigarettes? You smoke? Take a carton. Take my sister. Take a carton." And it went into early evening. By the time we were done, what happened was they waited. Well, once the orders were filled, those boxes went back in the garage. They waited until it got dark. When it got dark, they had cars that would pull up to the garage, back in, From the back of the front seat all the way to the trunk would be open, empty. They would fill it up with boxes of the cigarettes and then drape black cloth over the boxes in the back to make it appear to be a seat, and then drive off. This was car after car after car until all the boxes, all the orders went out. At that point, my cousin said goodbye. They all left, and that was it. What happened later was my father came home from work, and he said to my mom, he said, "Terry, how did it go today? Everything all right?" And my mom is a typical Italian woman, like a mouth like a sailor, and said, "If you ever effing do that to me again, I will divorce your effing ass." She was very upset because she knew what was going on, but probably wasn't aware of it. So my father said, what's the problem? $3,000 is not enough? And she said, what are you talking about? And he said, Dudu paid us $3,000 to use the house. That's not enough? My mom was like, oh, okay, well, you tell Dudu if he ever needs the house again, no problem, we'll take care of it, no problem.
Funny.
So that was my first real interaction with what was going on. And the two people that were there was Anthony Donona and Thomas Red Dilio. Those were my cousins, very close partners. They always did things together, those three. And Rich, Dudu's half brother, Richard Dormy, was also part of that clan. And Donona was from the Colombo family. Dilio was the Genovese family. So that's where my cousin commingled the families and whatever worked. He would do whatever he had to do to make money, basically.
Well, DeLeo and Donona, like your uncle, like Joe, none of them were made guys.
No, they were all associates.
Right.
Tommy was an associate with Genovese family because his uncle was Patty Mack.
Patty Mack, I know he is.
And right, and he did strong arm for Patty Mack, cigarette smuggling, again, a little bit of everything. He also ended up in the trunk of a car in, I believe it was 1974. Now, Tommy was the type, he scared me just looking at him. I sent you pictures. If you just saw him, he was the type that you would know, okay, I'm not going to mess with this guy. Anthony Donona, I really can't even remember his face. He didn't stand out to me. And of course, my cousin was a tough guy, but he really was just an earner. He just liked to make money. He really wasn't interested in the violent part of the families.
Well, being this the case, especially at having that experience at a young age, did it ever occur to you at that point, or did your uncle ever say anything to possibly groom you or anything? Did it ever come to you as a, wow, this looks interesting, I can make a lot of money? Did it ever?
Actually, what happened was there was a time I went to Dudu's house. He lived in Oceanside. He had waterfront property, canal front property. He had boats in the backyard. We went there, my father and I. We went out on his boat. Then his wife took me out on her boat. And yeah, I saw the life. I saw he always had a beautiful car. He had a beautiful house. He had boats. But the one thing was that most of that was actually in my father's name because obviously he didn't have any credit. So what he would do was he would have my father buy his cars or his house. It would be in his name. He'd pay him the cash to make the payments, get everything paid. And that's how he did business. My father ended up with excellent credit because of it, but all those things really were through my father. So we're at the house, and yeah, I saw the way he lived, and it never crossed my mind at that age. But he did say to me, well, first, what happened was my father had come to me a little while later after having coffee, and he said, because my cousin had a 36 Bayliner, I think it was. His wife had an 18-foot Sea Ray, and we had gone out on both boats. And when we came back in, we had coffee. My father said to me, "Do you want that boat?" And he was referring to the speedboat, the smaller one. And I said, "What do you mean? Do I want that boat?" And he said, "Do you want it?" I was like, "I don't know what you mean." He said, "Dudu wants to know if you want it, he'll give you that boat." As a 13, 14, 15, whatever I was at the time, I was like, "Sure, yeah, why not?" So the wife, which it was her boat, was like, "What are you talking about?" And she was a tough cookie too. She was an ex motorcycle chick. And she was like, "Yo, Joseph, that's my boat. You giving away my boat?" And he said, "Relax, relax. I'll buy you a new one. I'll buy you a new one. I'm going to give this one to Joseph." And then he pulled me outside. He said, "Look, the boat's yours if you want it." And then he did say to me, he said, "Listen," he said, "this life may look glamorous to you, but it's not a glamorous life. And I will never allow you to be a part of this life. So take the boat, go have fun, and relax." And that was pretty much saying, don't do what I do.
Oh, that was your father telling you this.
No, that was Dudu. That was
Oh, really?
Joseph, my cousin.
Oh, okay.
He yeah. No, my father
So
always,
this,
he wasn't,
so
go
for
ahead.
all intents and purposes, Dudu was actually protecting you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He knew, again, that my father never really, I'm sure he had the opportunity, because he was involved. My father was good friends with Sonny Franzese, with Jimmy Knapp, all those, because they grew up in Williamsburg and Greenpoint. So
Hmm.
my father probably had more than enough opportunity to live that life, but he chose not to. Um, he kind of lived it vicariously through my cousins and my uncle, but he never got involved in any way, shape, or form. So yes, it was Dudu protecting me, saying, "No, I won't let you do that."
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Um, well, he was protecting you, but at the same token, he was help asking you to box cigarettes out. That's kind
exactly.
of a little bit of a contradiction there.
Exactly. Well, actually, what happened was the situation with the boat and all that, and him telling me I can't be a part of it, was after we already filled the cigarette
Yeah, yeah,
orders.
yeah. Um,
But really, my like I said, my uncle Leo, he was killed in 1972. So I was more involved in respect that it was part of my family back in 72 when he was killed, because he was killed in 72, June of 1972, on Conciliation Street in Brooklyn. And I could never understand why he was killed, because I knew he was part of the numbers racket, but there was never any violence in his life. And
mhm.
I just couldn't conceive of why. So I tried to find out why he was killed. And in doing so, my research in the past years, my research led me to more knowing more about my cousin Dudu, and never really finding out why my uncle Leo was killed, because there was really no reason. He was killed in on Conciliation Street in the downstairs social club of the building, which
It was a Democratic
was
club, right?
it was called the Democratic Club, correct?
Right. Yeah.
And he was killed, and that was a private club. So whoever got in the club had to have known him. So whoever shot him must have known him, because he wouldn't have been able to get inside the club. And then, being that he was shot 3 times with a 9 millimeter, twice in the chest, once in the stomach, kind of let us know that it was somebody he knew, and maybe for the family, didn't shoot him in the head, gangland style, in order for us to be able to view at the wake. So
Right.
that always was, a question in my mind, why, which to this day never really got answered.
Well, that was, but your Uncle Joe, I mean, your cousin Joe, if I'm correct, was, he was close with Leo, right?
Yeah, he was close with Leo. That was, I think, how my cousin Joseph got involved through my uncle. Again, my uncle, I believe, was with the Genovese family, and Dudu was with the Colombo, mainly with the Colombo family. This was prior to um, uh, the capo at that time was Sonny Francesi, and before Sonny, um, Brancato, I think it was Joseph Brancato, took over when Francesi was arrested,
Right.
and my cousin Dudu was an affiliate with Brancato, and that was his way into that family. Again, he kind of branched out and was with a few families actually.
Well, and I'm not sure, you probably don't know, but do you think when after Leo was killed, did you think Joe might have wanted to find out who it was and get revenge? Do you think that might have crossed his mind?
I, I had that conversation with my father, and my father made it sound like it is what it is. Whatever, for whatever reason, that's the reason. That's that life. But I couldn't accept it. I can't speak for how my cousin felt. I remember he was pretty upset at the funeral. But again, it's the life, and there could have been a totally different reason. I've juggled in my mind with all the research I've done that Leo was arrested with two others on the policy racket, and supposedly Jerry Devanza was one, and the other one was a man named Frank and the Costco, I believe his name was. I didn't know who they were, but the three of them were arrested. And my dad said something that at the funeral, Jerry was a little nervous, and maybe he thought my uncle was going to talk. But it turned out that the case was dropped anyway, so there wouldn't have been any concern about somebody ratting. So it didn't, two and two didn't add up. So again, I don't know who the killer was or what the motive was, but that kind of stuck with me because he was
Oh,
my godfather. He was my real godfather. When I was confirmed.
Leo's murder to this day is a cold case.
Yeah, yep, that's a cold case. As far as Dudu's murder, it's a cold case, but that that came about with Joe Messina, and there was information I didn't know growing up. I found out this later with doing research, but back in '69, and I think I sent you the testimony of Joe Messina. It was the killing of a Bonanno associate named Tommy Zumo that um, Dudu, Anthony Donona, Thomas Dilio, and Messino all conspired to kill Zumo. The story was that Anthony Donona got into an argument with Zumo, and Zumo was the type that they said would shoot you in a minute over nothing.
Yeah.
So Anthony was concerned for his life. And according to this testimony, he went to Messino and asked for help to kill Zumo. Now, Zumo was a Bonanno associate, Donona was a Colombo associate. So you had a Colombo associate asking a Bonanno associate to help kill a Bonanno associate. So they did conspire, and they ended up killing Zumo. Don't know who the trigger man was, but it was Donona, my cousin Joseph, Thomas Dilio, and Messino.
You know,
Now, Messino was concerned about this because he had loaded the magazine in the gun that killed him. And that magazine happened to fall out. I don't know how true this is, but supposedly fell out at the scene. So Messino was concerned because his fingerprints would have been on whatever
uh,
bullets were in the magazine.
of course.
Evidently, the magazine was never found, and that case went as a cold case as well. The interesting part of that story is that when Messino was reporting to Rusty Rastelli, who was in jail at that time,
Right.
Rusty Rastelli had asked Messino, "Do you know anything about the killing of Tommy Zumo?"
Zumo, yeah.
And Messino right away said, "No, I have no idea." But he was actually the mastermind. Well, they all conspired, but he was the mastermind and never told Rastelli, because Rastelli had said to him, "Well, if I find out who killed Zumo, I have the okay from the commission to go ahead and take them out," which would have been Messino.
Zeno. Yeah.
So that was a lie that Rastelli never found out about. And um,
Well,
Messino only,
Sal Vitale also mentioned it too, didn't he?
yes, Salvatore, when he turned state witness, did mention that. He also actually, the case of the murder of my cousin was a cold case, but Vitale actually pleaded guilty to his murder, but it was part of his agreement with the government to turn state's evidence. You take the blame for the murder, and we'll do this for you. And I think he's still in witness protection. Out of everybody that I know, I think he's the only one, maybe alive, I'm not sure, but he took blame for the killing of my cousin. But the killer was actually allegedly Carmine Tutti Francesi, which was the nephew of Sonny
Right.
Francesi.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
And
so,
him and my cousin were like this. And it was actually him. That was the only way they could get to my cousin, was through his
well,
best friend.
well, that's how it works. It's your best friend that kills you. That's the way the life
Exactly.
is. So,
Exactly. Like the pictures, for instance, the pictures that I had sent to you of my cousin are probably the only photos of him that I've ever seen. One is his mugshot, and the other one was at my parents' 50th anniversary, which he still didn't want to be in that photo. But my father pulled him aside, whispered something in his ear, and him and his brother were part of that family photo. But I have never, to this day, seen any other photos of him. So he was very careful of how he did business. And evidently that ended up also getting him killed because he trusted his best friend.
but I mean, being is the case, and your experiences with Leo and Joe, um, before I mention the other gentleman, your experiences with Leo and Joe, um, I'm assuming they treated you really well, threw you a couple of dollars here and there. Were they were like what, the typical uncle and cousin that anybody's would have? Like, in other words, if it was me, I would never even think they're even involved in this world, in that life.
It it was that way with my uncle Leo. He was very special. Like I said, he was my real godfather when I received confirmation, and he was the type of man that he actually gave to me and my sister and his other nieces and nephews on Christmas and their birthday. He would give them us a glass piggy bank filled with dimes. And you literally had to break the bank to get the money out because there was no, you could put the money in, but you couldn't get it out. And he would give it to all his nephews and nieces. He was very generous. He made a lot of money. At that time, they were doing like 45 to $50,000 a day in the numbers,
Wow.
which is about 18 million a year. And in today's dollar, that would probably be around 140 million a year. So he was doing very well, making very good money. He took care of the family, but he didn't show it. Okay, he didn't flaunt it. Um, he gave me that. There's another story just about him that I was sitting in my kitchen one day and he happened to come by unannounced as usual because he didn't never had a exact schedule. So he came by and I was at the kitchen table and I was um, looking through coins for my coin collection. And I saw that he was very interested right away. He's like, wow, you have a coin collection. I said, yeah. He said, let me ask you, if I was to give you some coins, would you have the patience to go through them? And I said, sure. He said, I have a lot of coins. I said, okay, yeah, I'll be happy to. So weeks later or a month later, he came by with, I don't remember if it was 6, 7, 8 cigar boxes filled with coins from pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, 50-cent pieces, silver dollars, complete 8 boxes. They happen to be all silver at that time. So my mother and I went through every coin, took what I needed. There were some coins that were worth a lot more than face value because they were very old. He evidently collected coins, not for a collection, just threw them in a box. That was his change. That's what he would give us as gifts as well. So, make a long story short, went through everything, took it. I called him up. I said, I've gone through everything. You know, you could pick up the rest. He said, no, you could keep it. So I was like, really? He said, yeah, don't worry about it. Now, it was about, I think it was $2,500 or $3,000 in coins. So I was thrilled, you know. So what happened was my father had a friend of a friend who was a jeweler and said, I'll take the silver, melt it down, but I'll pay you more than face value for it. So I ended up getting, I don't know, maybe $500 or $1,000 more, $500 or $1,000 more than what it was face value. And I ended up with about $4,000 because of his generosity.
Well,
So
how old were you at the time?
I was probably about 14 or 15 because I remember using that money to buy my second drum set. Buying my first, I had one already that was given to me, but that was buying my first drum set. And I also bought my first car, which was at about 16 or 17. And he also gave my sister was like, yeah, what about me? But he actually, for her graduation, he gave her his car, which was a 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix. Now,
Nice.
anybody knows cars, that was
Oh,
the model that looked sporty and it was beautiful. It was gold with black interior. And he gave it to her for her graduation, but it was too big for her. So my mother said, all right, find a car you like. I'll buy it and I'll keep the Grand Prix. And that's what they did. My sister ended up with an Opal. I was like, geez, should have kept the Grand Prix.
that's funny.
But he was generous that way. And also doo-doo. I mean, he gave me a 18-foot Sea Ray. That was like the Cadillac of boats back in the day. And, but other than that, they didn't flaunt it. They didn't, well, I have a story with Doo-Doo because I never knew why he had the nickname Doo-Doo. I mean, you have Sammy the
That
Bull and
was the next question.
Anthony Donuts and all this. And I was just dumbfounded. I was like, and if you look, some articles spell it Doo, Doo, some spell it Dodo. So I was part of Our Lady of Mount Carmel Feast in Williamsburg. And I used to carry the Giglio every year. And one year I was under the Giglio, and at that time, everybody wanted to carry. And you couldn't get a spot under it. It was just very hard to do. Today, it's very easy. But back then, it was hard. So when somebody would get tired, sometimes they would call somebody from off the street that had a shirt and a hat and would come underneath. So somebody came under that I didn't recognize, and we were carrying, high five, and the guy said to me, "What's your name, by the way?" I said, "Joseph Pastore," and he just took a step back. He was like, he goes, "Are you related to Joseph Doo Pastore?" I said, "Yeah, he was my cousin." "Oh my God," he said, "Your cousin." He said, "I knew him. I wasn't involved, but I knew him really well. And I used to go to parties that he used to have. And your cousin was like the best. He threw the best parties. It was all the alcohol, punch bowls of cocaine, prostitutes." And I'm like, that's the first I ever heard of that. And he was like, "Did you ever go to any of his parties?" And I was like, "No, I was too young." So I said to him, I said, "You knew him." I said, "Why? Do you know why he was called Doo-Doo?" And he said, "From what I understand, they called him Doo-Doo because he used to do whatever he wanted to do. It's not doo-doo like crap. He
Yeah,
literally would do whatever he wanted to do," which again could be part of his reason for his demise as well. But that's where he got the nickname.
interesting. What happened, like guys like Anthony Denona and Tommy DeLeo? I mean, how well did you know those two?
Well, I did. I met them and I knew of them. Okay. Again, I was very young, but as I grew up, I later learned that actually Tommy DeLeo was a pretty rough character. He was, again, Patty Mac's strong arm man. They, Tommy, my cousin Anthony, my cousin's half brother Richie, they were all, I think, indicted at one point for the assault of a maitre d and a customer at the Cloud Room Bar, which was, I think it was across from LaGuardia Airport. They were, I believe, Patty Mac was trying to extort the business, and in a result of that, they beat up the maitre d, which his name was Floyd Matlow. And I say that name because it comes up later on in my life. It's weird how it came full circle. But they were, I knew them to be the ones that were indicted on that charge, which was dropped. I believe the owner of that club was killed, Conrad Greaves, I think his name was. He was killed because he was about to testify um, against Delio and that whole group. And but they never.
That was what that was like 1974 or five or something like that.
That was around 74 or 75 because actually it had to be before that because Tommy was killed in 74.
Ah,
So
okay, that's
it had to be before 74. Yeah, but I didn't I didn't know them on a personal level other than physically meeting them, but I didn't know them. I was too young. I got to know more about them after the death or after charges were filed, things like that.
Interesting. Well, being that the case, you've experienced all this stuff and having, family ties with guys like Leo and Joe. Um, was there ever a time where your dad was like, okay, I don't mind you hanging out with them. That's all cool. But keep in mind, you ain't going down this road. Did that ever occur?
My dad made it perfectly clear to me that that was not a road I was going to travel. Yeah, he made that perfectly clear. And speaking of my father, he was kind of like on the border. Like I said, he probably had many opportunities, but he did choose the right path. He was a truck driver. He drove a 18-wheeler, and his side business was, as they say, the things that fell off the back of the truck. But he was not involved in anything other than that. He came home with, all kinds of things that fell off the back of the truck, and my mother would sell them, but he never involved himself. I think because he knew better, he knew what happened to his brother. I believe, in my research, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe Joseph Dudu Pastore's father, who was Michael, they called him Mickey. I believe he was involved. He was first to be involved. It was Genovese family, but
Yeah.
I cannot find any information on him. But it does come up that he was involved. So that's probably the segue to my cousin
Right.
getting involved.
Right. Okay.
But yeah,
Um,
no, it was made clear by my father that's not a road you'll travel.
um, well, before we end the show, which was very interesting to say the least, um, now you yourself, Joseph Pastore, what are you
Yes.
thinking about doing anything with all these great stories? Maybe a book, maybe a film. I mean, is anything, has it ever come across your mind?
It's come across my mind for a book, and mostly because the books I've read, the ones that did have information on Dudu were not always correct. The information was incorrect. And to set the story straight, maybe I thought of, well,
Hmm.
maybe I'll write a book and set the story straight. But other than that, it's just been a thought. Maybe I'll do it one day. Maybe we'll do it one day. You could
Right,
help me.
right. That'd be cool. Well,
Yeah,
Joe, listen, I thank you for coming on the show and sharing these interesting stories with guys that most people don't hear about, which is actually better and more interesting because you don't want to hear the same old names all the time. So,
right.
but before I let you go, even though
Yeah.
the even though the name Pastore is very popular, I mean, just curiosity. I don't know if your uncle or cousin had any relation to the actor Vincent Pastore.
No, we were not related to Vincent at all. And it's
Oh,
it's it's funny. It's funny that it would be Vincent Pastore playing the role of a mobster.
I know that is pretty. That's why I said it. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. I've never been associated. Nobody's asked me, "Oh, are you related to Vincent Pastore?" Nobody's ever asked me that. You're the first one.
Yeah, I guess Pastore. I guess Pastore's I guess a pretty popular name.
Yeah,
with the but like I said, Joe, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was a
I
lot of fun,
appreciate having me.
and we'll definitely keep in touch, obviously.
Sounds good. I'd love that.
And if anybody wants to hit you up, say hello, ask you about anything, I guess they can find you on Facebook, if I'm correct.
Um, I'm probably private on Facebook, but if they want to get any information, they could go through you. You could contact me, and I'd be happy to entertain
Good, I'll play your agent.
it. Fair enough.
Fair enough. All right, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it, brother.
Thank you, Nick. Have a good day.